Um, Good morning to all of you. This is the third lecture on cultural policy, and let us begin today by talking about a definition. Let's try to build up a working definition of cultural policy. What do we mean by cultural policy? Cultural policy is the government action, laws, and programs that regulate, protect, encourage, and financially or otherwise support activities that are related to the arts and creative sectors such as painting, sculpture, music, dance, literature, and filmmaking, among others, and which may involve activities also related to language, heritage, and diversity. So let's try to repeat this working definition of cultural policy. Cultural policy is the government actions, laws, and programs that regulate, protect, encourage, and support financially or otherwise activities that are related to the arts and creative sectors such as painting, sculpture, music, dance, literature, filmmaking, among others, and culture generally, which may also involve activities which are related to language, heritage, and diversity. Thus, as you can see that there is a huge role of the government in cultural policy making. In fact, it is the role of the government to frame cultural policy, and therefore the state has a four-pronged responsibility to frame cultural policy. It has four kinds of responsibilities in terms of cultural policy. First, the first responsibility on the part of the state, in so far as cultural policy making is concerned, is to regulate. Okay, the first point is to regulate culture. Secondly, to protect cultural activities or to protect culture. Obviously, when you say the intention of the state is to protect culture, there is a hint of a condescending attitude, of a patronizing attitude, but that cannot be helped, I guess. At least, protection definitely is one of the functions, one of the responsibilities of the state, the protection of culture. The third point is to encourage uh, the cultural participation of people, right? To encourage and to disseminate culture, to enhance the cultural life of our people, and to spread uh, cultural ideas amongst people. And finally, the responsibility of the state is also to financially support, uh, all kinds of cultural activities. Now, what kind of activities are we talking about? Again, going back to our working definition of cultural policy, this includes uh, things like painting, sculpture, music, dance, literature, filmmaking, and remember, culture will encompass not just culture in the narrow sense, but obviously language, heritage, and diversity will all figure in this. Now, broadly speaking, in the context of cultural policy, what does culture comprise of? Culture comprises the arts, the cultural heritage, and the media. Broadly speaking, these are the three broad areas which are included within the rubric of culture. Now, when you talk about the cultural field, it can also include public support for cultural production, distribution, mediation, and consumption. in the form of money, organization, information, and normative policy making. Normative policy making is important, is an integral part of cultural policy making. Normative policy making involves the orientation of the pursuit of excellence. Doing activities or encouraging activities that would lead to the development of excellence in a society. That is to be encouraged. So that is the normative policy making. Let me repeat this point. The cultural field should include or does include public support for cultural production and distribution and mediation and consumption. This, this could be at the level of financial organization, or could be, or even other kinds of organization, information, and also normative policy making. Right. So these are the things that the cultural field consists of. And when we talk about uh, products or artifacts within the field of cultural policy, we're talking about the services and activities which are politically and normatively defined as cultural, and which are therefore subject to ideological, political, and economic interest. So cultural policy making involves or revolves around products or artifacts, which um, could be services and activities as well, which are politically and normatively defined as cultural, and therefore they are subject to ideological, political, and economic interest. Right? So the cultural is shaped by, what we mean by the cultural in cultural policy is shaped by ideological, political, and economic interest. Uh, the cultural is therefore a part of a broader political ecosystem. And within this political system, there is a specific subsystem which is concerned with the cultural, and which we call the cultural policy system. Right? So the political ecosystem of a country is the broad category, and within that there is a smaller category which is concerned more immediately with the cultural, and this is what we call the cultural policy system. And remember that what we mean by the cultural is a question that is always answered in terms of ideological, political, and economic interest. So what is cultural for you may not be cultural for me. It will be shaped by my ideological, political, and economic interest. Right. So this is important for us to remember. The main aim of cultural policy is to support certain forms of culture, to make it flourish, and to make it accessible to the citizens. Thus, cultural policy aims to improve the cultural life of a community. Right? The cultural, the one of the main aims of cultural policy is to improve the cultural life of a community. So, with this in mind, it has to support certain forms of culture, and it has to support it so that it can flourish, and it's also able to make it accessible to the citizens. Now, some thinkers like Paul DiMaggio uh, think of cultural policy in a broad sense, including within it discussions about education curricula as well. Right? It's possible to think of cultural policy in a very broad sense. And in that regard, say for instance, even things like the new education policy should be discussed within the framework of cultural policy. So quite obviously, it is also concerned with other areas of cultural production and reception. Uh, if it can include educational curricula within it, the range of cultural policy, as you can understand, is pretty vast, pretty large. Uh, Cultural policy, remember, deals with decisions about cultural goods. When those decisions are in some way contested. In other words, cultural policy can involve itself in decision making processes about cultural goods. Now, cultural policy does not come in probably with regard to all kinds of cultural goods. There are certain kinds of cultural goods whose implications are ideologically contested because it means different things to different people. So it becomes a very sensitive issue, and therefore there is the requirement of intervention on the part of cultural policy. So, does a particular cultural good deserve to be publicized? This is what cultural policy looks at. Like, there are different kinds of cultural goods that we find today in the market in our everyday life. Now, which kinds of goods deserve to be supported by the state, right? And which are the ones that it can do without? Um, so how would the state, say for instance, look at a cultural commodity or a cultural good like a film, say for instance, which has the potential to generate strife in the audience? Think about the case of Padmavat. I think it was 2 years back when we had that huge uproar about the film and its release, and there were people who said that they it was a cultural, you understand that Padmavat as a cultural commodity was highly contested. It was ideologically contested because it meant different things to different people, and there was no consensus about it. So it sought the intervention of the state. This is where cultural policy comes in. Cultural policy would be in place even otherwise, but it has to specifically intervene in the case of certain kinds of cultural commodities or certain kinds of cultural goods when it's invested with a lot of cultural meaning, which therefore makes it an ideological issue and obviously, therefore, culturally very, very sensitive. That is where cultural policy has to come in. Now, once there is a broad public uh, consensus about a particular cultural good or artifact. After that, I think the next step for cultural policy will be to mainly focus its attention on how best to distribute or you know um, or advertise or provide access to the good. So the first thing about which we need cultural policy, and it has to be very clear and decisive in this, is which are the commodities for which the intervention of cultural policy is required. Obviously, for a film like Padmavat, which created such a lot of furor, there was the need for the intervention of a cultural policy. Now, once having said that, once that is done, the next point is if the state agrees or if the state accepts the broad point that a particular cultural good or a particular cultural artifact or a particular cultural commodity um, deserves to be sort of supported by the state, then the next point of contestation is how best can the state help to distribute or provide access to the good in question. Suppose there is already consensus about a particular cultural good. The state doesn't have anything to do about that, but it has to worry about forming a policy that facilitates the access of people to that particular commodity. Now, the example that I can think of immediately with regard to this is the Vrindavani Vastra in the context of Assam. Some 4 years back, I think it was in Tejpur University when we hosted um, one of the curators of the British Museum who is in charge of, uh, you know, the Vrindavani Vastra that's kept in the British Museum. And he came here to have a discussion with people and also with the state. regarding the possibility of providing greater access to this particular cultural good, that is the Vrindavani Vastra, because the value of that particular commodity is already something that's deeply rooted in the minds of the Assamese people, because apparently it was a piece of cloth that was made by Sankardev, the Vaishnavite saint of Assam. Now, whether or not that piece of cloth, which is there in the British Museum today, was made by Shankardev himself, is beside the point. The cultural value of that commodity is taken for granted. It's established. It's there. I mean, the popular imagination of the people of Assam. The next point that the government has to worry about is to facilitate people's access to this particular cultural good, right? So everyone in Assam is aware of the cultural value of the Vastra. You don't have to tell anyone about that. The question is, how best can we provide people access to it, considering the fact that it is now located in the British Museum. In fact, the gentleman, Richard Blurton, who came over here in order to facilitate this access to the commodity, the Vrindavani Vastra, he even suggested that there is a possibility that if the state is willing to take the responsibility of the item, then it could even be physically transferred for some time in order to facilitate access for the general masses so that everyone can go and take a look. The artifact itself could be brought here to Assam for a limited period of time, of course. So that's one of the possibilities. But even otherwise, I mean, how does one worry about providing, or how does one plan to provide greater access to such a commodity? Now, another important aspect of cultural policy uh, is to check how different groups of players, say the government or the foundations or the corporations that are in charge of cultural policy or that are taking the lead in deciding or facilitating access of culture to the people, how do they define culture and how they see um, how they view the object of their support or policies. These are very often ideological choices that are important to understand cultural policy decisions. All right. So, who are the major players in cultural policy making? The major players in cultural policy making, of course, one is the state, the government, that is the most important. Secondly, we have a host of foundations and organizations that extend support to the protection and preservation and revitalization of cultures. Then there are corporations as well. Corporates have increasingly tended to um, show a lot of involvement in protecting mm, and preserving cultures. But they all have they all identify the objects that are to be protected or preserved in terms of a hierarchy. Now, this hierarchy reflects ideological choices. Who gives more priority to what kind of cultural commodity is a matter that will be decided by uh, the the ideologies that the different players subscribe to. Um, Generally, we see that cultural policymakers think of culture as a reflection of a refinement of a culture. This is the old kind of understanding of culture, which is not necessarily, of course, related to cultural studies, but it's there. It's still there, and it has a powerful hold in the minds of people. Culture as reflecting refinement, right? This idea is deeply rooted in the minds of people, and very often this results in a bias towards some forms of elitist cultural forms. Conversely, we can also argue that the conservation of elitist cultural forms is just one aspect of cultural policy, right? Um, because what is again, going back to the last point that we were making, what is considered to be important from one point of view of from the perspective of one ideology may not be as important from the perspective of another. So today, cultural policy has to incorporate the ethos of the contemporary time. It has to take cognizance of folk and popular culture as well in this respect. So it cannot only think in terms of that libicide idea of refinement and of that minority culture and all that. It has to take cognizance of the demands of our time to facilitate a greater recognition for the folk and popular culture as well. Now, cultural policy is not just a unidirectional process, which is framed by the government and like the cattle in a herd, the people or the masses at large, they just follow whatever is the intention of the government. It doesn't always work that way. In fact, most of the time, it doesn't work that way at all. To cite an example, which is a very interesting one, during the time of the Cold War, about which all of you are familiar, I mean, there was a policy of a cultural exchange between the United States of America and the Union of the Soviet Socialist Republic, the USSR. So there was cultural exchange between these two countries, which were ideologically divided, and the world itself at that point of time, it was thought, was ideologically divided between those who belonged to or subscribed to the philosophy of the Soviets and those who subscribed to or leaned towards the philosophy of the Americans. Now, look at the way in which cultural policy was used to facilitate um, diplomatic relationships between two communities, even at that point of time. So, there's a lot of cultural exchange taking place, and as part of this policy of cultural exchange between the USSR and the USA, films, books, and exhibits were shared between the two nations. And the American objective in doing this, apparently, was to sell or to promote uh, capitalism in the USSR. But in reality, this exchange opened up the space for better appreciation of Soviet culture. So you cannot actually control what the audience is going to do or what the people are going to do. So what started out as an attempt actually to sell American culture to the Soviets ended up facilitating a process of greater cultural understanding between the two countries, whereby the Americans started to develop a keen sense of understanding and a keen sense of appreciation for Soviet art and culture, and particularly for Soviet life. So, yeah, you cannot direct or you cannot make a decision. I mean, you can make a policy decision, of course, but you cannot ensure that the policy decision will get reflected at the level of the communities. The communities will, take it up in their own way, right? So there is now a broad consensus about four different approaches that the different states can adopt towards culture. Um, Number one, um, remember, the cultural policy can do different things. Cultural policy can aim to do different things, but there are four different approaches, more or less, that binds all the different um, activities of the states of the world in terms of their attitude towards cultural policy. Firstly, cultural policy could be adopted in general planning. cultural policy need not be a separate thing. It could be integrated with general planning itself, built into the system as it were. So instead of having a separate item like cultural policy, some states like to do it this way. They make it a part of their overall in structure itself. So culture is integrated into the overall system. It's not treated separately. Secondly, the state in some cases may believe that it has a moral responsibility for culture, just as it has an obligation towards the nation. The state might think that it has an obligation towards the people's culture as well. So this might on occasions even lead the state to replace or to substitute private initiatives of protecting culture and force itself to intervene, right? So where the state thinks that the um, interests of the people, the sentiments of the people are in question, and it cannot be left to private parties alone to handle that, the state can intervene. And when it does so, it reflects that the state is firmly committed in its moral obligation towards culture, because they do not see this obligation towards culture as being in any ways separate from its obligation to the nation itself. So that there is this approach. Thirdly, there is another approach which believes that the state's role should be minimal in the direct management of cultural institutions. Some states are apprehensive of the fact that, or they realize that if there is too much state intervention in cultural policy, then people will be separated from their cultural life. Cultural policy cannot be merely thought of in terms of legislation, or it cannot be merely thought of in terms of policies. It demands, it necessitates the intimate involvement of people in different activities. And if in these, um, the, the, some people feel that the state should limit its role and keep it to the minimal, because if there's too much state intervention, then there is the danger that it may actually lead to um, a situation where culture doesn't remain people's culture anymore. It becomes official culture. It becomes culture of the government or the culture of the state, which is not the same thing. Finally, the last approach uh, towards culture of the state equates cultural development with nation building. So some states seem to think, and this was a tendency that was particularly apparent in the 19th century, particularly amongst the European states. One used to see this quite strongly. Culture was used as a tool for nation building, right? So it was important for the government to intervene in each and every aspect of culture, and so this is another way of looking at it, the approach of the state. So we're talking about four different approaches of the state uh, towards culture. All right, let's make a restatement of the points that we have made. Firstly, uh, culture could be thought of as not necessitating a separate agenda or a separate section for itself, but it's something that could be built into uh, the system, right? Integrated with a general policy. The second is that the state feels that it has a moral responsibility towards culture, just as it is morally obliged towards the nation. So this may even lead to instances when privatization is controlled, is monitored by the state, and sometimes the protection of cultural artifacts or the protection of culture itself is taken away from the hands of private parties by the state. This is the second approach. Then there's the third approach, which believes that the state's role should be minimal in the direct management of cultural institutions. And fourth approach is that culture has a big role to play in nation building. So culture has to be used that way. Right? Cultural development is equated with nation building, and only that kind of culture will be or should be propagated or should be encouraged, which helps in building a nation, building unity in a nation. Right. So, take note of these different attitudes or these different approaches towards mm, culture that the states exhibit. Right. Now, there's another important point that we will take up today, um, which is particularly relevant to our times. Uh, this concerns the idea of cultural democracy and its connection with cultural policymaking. Cultural democracy is a philosophical framework for cultural policy. Cultural democracy posits that many cultural traditions coexist in human society, and that none of these should be allowed to dominate and become the official culture of a particular state, of a particular country, right? So this is the philosophy which presents the idea. Cultural democracy is a philosophy that presents the idea that uh, there are many different cultural traditions that coexist in human society, and coexistence is, whether you like it or not, um, a reality for all of us. We have to learn to live. We have to learn to coexist because we are living in increasingly heterogeneous societies, all of us. And therefore, it's important that we do not allow one culture to become the official culture of a country or of a nation, which will dominate over the others. This philosophy is reflective by the idea of cultural democracy. So, cultural democracy is a necessity because history is witness to many incidents when one community had taken to the belief that its cultural superiority legitimized uh, the process of forcing down uh, its own culture, you know, in other people's throats. My culture is better than your culture, so you should adopt my culture. This kind of an attitude, which was very common till the first part of the 20th century. This sense of cultural superiority, this sense of ethnic superiority, legitimized the uh, violence of trying to impose one's own culture on other people. And this was apparently done for the benefit of the community on whom the new culture was imposed. So we have the idea, for instance, of imperialism, the, the idea of the white man's burden, which was an instance of this. You were all aware of what the white man's burden means, right? Shall not go into the details of that. This kind of an attitude basically means that diversity is seen as a problem which needs to be removed. And this tendency was, as I said, widely prevalent till the middle of the 20th century in many parts of the world. The belief that some kinds of culture are better than some others, and therefore those better cultures must impose themselves on the so-called lesser cultures of the world. And this attitude, in a way, in the long run, obviously harmed cultural diversity because the uh, whole understanding was that cultural diversity itself is a problem which needs to be eradicated or which needs to be removed. Thus, cultural democracy is a necessity for a civil society. It means a culture of inclusion. It also refers to a celebration of uh, differences. So instead of eliminating differences, cultural democracy celebrates the idea of difference. So remember, till the middle of the 20th century, there is the tendency to think about culture in terms of refinement and all that. And therefore, there was also the um, associated tendency to push or impose one's own culture on other people. Because my culture is the better one, so you have to adopt to my ways of life. You know, those communities who are weaker politically, militarily, or otherwise have to subscribe to or have to adhere to the values of the new culture, because the new culture is apparently better than the old one. Cultural democracy, the coming of cultural democracy changed all that, and it started a culture of inclusion. It encouraged a culture of inclusion, and it also referred to a celebration of difference. Now, cultural democracy um, has different features. There are uh, three different features of cultural democracy that we can think of, and let us quickly look at these before we move on. What are the different um, aspects of, or what are the different features of cultural democracy? All right, we'll do that in the next class.